In mid-November 2022, COVID cases in Xinjiang started to increase again, and we were all holding our breath because we knew from previous experience that all it takes is just 5 cases for the city to go into lockdown. And by that point, cases had already reached close to 50 and kept increasing at an alarming rate day after day. It all came to a halt on Thanksgiving Day when the notice was released and we officially entered the 4th lockdown of 2022. It was the day before my birthday when I attempted to go to the fresh market right outside my gate, and I was denied leaving my compound, and 3 years of mental trauma just erupted. I was so upset and angry that we still had to go through this, and I had a moment of pure hopelessness, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I really couldn't do this anymore, and I wished that I could go home. I just needed a mental break from all of this. Then, something strange started happening. Rumors started swirling around. The COVID testing kiosks started disappearing. The gates were unsealed. The numbers kept growing, but the restrictions kept being lifted. Restaurants opened. Businesses resumed. Deliveries were allowed back inside again. Then one day they announced that you no longer need 48 hours negative test to go to public places. Then one morning we woke up and our health codes no longer showed any signs of 48 hours anywhere. I remember thinking, is this really happening? Is this really the end? People across the country felt collectively victorious in this battle. Videos, images, and articles started being circulated on social media that showed signs that it all is really going to end. And this really pushed us to a sense of hope, a sense of renewed life, almost a new will to continue. The schools in Xinjiang were officially allowed to resume during the 3rd week of December 2022. Although no parents agreed to actually send their kids to school, everyone was really terrified. Now, I want you to keep in mind that during 2022, kids hardly even attended school. In the entire school year, the only full months they attended offline schooling was during January and July. The rest of the months were either pushed online due to lockdowns or extended holidays like Chinese New Year and Golden Week. The COVID era in China was coming to an end. Restrictions were being lifted nationwide. We did it. We won. 3 years. I will say that again. 3 years. Really think about how long 3 years really is. My daughter was 2 when the outbreak happened. She will be going to 1st grade later this year. So let that sink in for a moment. But of course, with all rainbows, there has to be a storm first. And well, then we all got COVID. Now, an interesting thing to note here is that COVID never really came very close to home within China. Some of my family members in South Africa did get COVID, but as far as people in China, in 3 years, I'd never met anyone who had COVID. And you have to understand that we have WeChat groups of all sorts. And in particular, we have a large group for South African parents in China and just South Africans in general. And no one ever got COVID. But within days of restrictions being lifted, we all started getting COVID, one by one, falling like flies, crippled by the Rona. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it was just a sniffle, even though the day I was crying by the gate, I was yelling about how we are being locked up to protect us from a sniffle. Well, karma, my friends, is a real thing because COVID sure kicked my ass. I was completely down and out of it for at least 6 days, and even after I started recovering, I didn't feel completely back to normal until well after Christmas. Alia and most other kids that I know for that matter got through it pretty unscathed. A fever for about a day and no other issues. Now, how did the entire population getting COVID affect our lives, you might ask? Well, for one, there were no delivery drivers, which was so awful because not being able to go out and buy food, not because of restrictions, but because you feel like you're dying, and not being able to order anything either, I almost starved to death. Well, not really, but you know what I'm saying. Eventually, I did go to the fresh market or just ended up waiting 3 hours for food to be delivered. Another major thing that happened was that as soon as it seemed like restrictions were gonna end, a lot of people freaked out and pharmacies were emptied. Mass panic erupted to get your hands on home testing kits and medication. By the time I got COVID, like a day later, the only medication I could get for my fever and pain was arthritis medication. Other than that being a major inconvenience, there really wasn't anything else causing havoc in our lives. Even though everyone had COVID, there were no restrictions. And a popular Dongbei greeting, 你吃了吗, was quickly replaced by 你阳过了吗? It was just after New Year when everyone seemed to be recovered from COVID, and slowly but surely you could see people returning to normal pre-2020 way of life. And now, being in February 2023, there are still some remnants in the city of the pandemic, but it's almost as if it's become just a distant memory of a life once lived. And let me tell you, having lived through mandatory daily mass testing, months-long lockdowns, 48 hours codes, mandatory masks, scanning location codes, and watching over your shoulder every time you hear someone cough, having this sense of freedom is something I can't explain in words, and I am so grateful that it's all come to an end. China did a great job at keeping the population safe for 3 years, but it came at a very high cost. But in the end, 3 years on, we all got it, and most people recovered. Of course, lives were lost, but so much was gained in the end. So with that being said, here's to 2023, our first normal year since the turn of the decade. For the first time in years, we can plan things and talk about the places we want to visit, knowing we can actually go without worrying about restrictions. So I really hope you guys will come along on this journey that lies ahead of us in 2023 and get a glimpse into what life in China is really like.